All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
This Friday, see what critics are calling a cold-blooded masterpiece.
Hello, Finney.
You're dead.
Dead is just a word. Did you think our story was over?
Discover the secret
He brought us here for a reason.
behind the mask.
What do you think happens when you die? It's time to find out.
Ethan Hawke,
I'm not afraid of you.
You should be.
Black Phone 2, only in theaters Friday. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
And here was this total lie that we had all been acting out for 9 years.
Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we'll dig a little deeper into the pivotal moments that shaped the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. This week, we're honored to welcome an icon of modern songwriting to the show, Suzanne Vega. Back in the 80s and 90s, Suzanne Vega carved out a space that was entirely her own in the male-dominated folk and pop scenes. Her songs didn't sound like anything else on the radio at the time. They were poetic and quietly powerful. You know her iconic songs like Luka and Tom's Diner, but her catalog runs deep, spanning folk, pop, experimental sounds, and everything in between. Today, Suzanne shares a story not just about discovering who she is, but also about realizing who she isn't.
So I think I was 9 years old when my stepfather, I didn't know he was my stepfather, my dad, pulled me into the living room and sat me down, which he did often about a lot of things. So I didn't know what to think, but I was there, and he said, "Have you ever wondered why you don't look like me?" And to be honest, I hadn't, which now seems kind of odd because he was a dark-skinned Puerto Rican man with an afro, and but my brothers and sisters all had straight hair and blue eyes. My mom had straight hair, obviously, and so if the question ever came up, like in the neighborhood, if people would point to me and say, "Where, why does she look so different?" He would always say, "She looks like her mother." So I just assumed that I looked like my mother, and I never thought about it. I mean, I knew his family. I was very well loved by his mother, my grandmother, who taught me Spanish. And the other thing to know is that Ed Vega was my dad since I was 9 months old. I mean, that's when he came into my life. So I only knew my dad as Ed Vega. But I thought I better think about the answer to this question because there was an obvious right answer. If I said no, so I think I must have said yeah, thinking that was probably the right answer. And then he said the surprising thing. He said, "I'm not really your father." He said, "I'm not really your father." And I thought, what? I thought, who is? For a split second, I thought it was our neighbor, Marvin. He was white, and I thought, is Marvin my father? I mean, as it turns out, Marvin was not my father. My father was some guy in California that I'd never heard of. And he confirmed for me that my father was white, and so that I was not Puerto Rican. That was the biggest surprise because I had my aunt, who was very loving and spent a lot of time with me. And my aunt had this little thing she would do with me where we would compare feet. And we both had long, big toes, and that sort of went down in size. And she assured me that that was the sign of royalty in Egypt. And so that we both had this toe. And so therefore we were both descended from royalty. And this was something I really loved, this little myth. So then suddenly it's like, what? How can I not be related to Titi Abby, who has the same toe that I have? But he says, no, I had this other guy was my father. And my mother walked in at that moment, and he turned to my mother and said, I've told her about Richard. I thought it was best. So I looked at my mother to see if she had any idea what he was talking about, because maybe it was a joke. But she did. She seemed to know what he was talking about. So I thought, wow, I'm in big trouble, because this is I mean, I just couldn't even fathom what what that meant. Because not only was I white, because Puerto Ricans come in all races. There are Puerto Ricans who are blonde and have blue eyes and pale skin. They don't quite look like me. I mean, as it turns out, I'm English, Scottish, and Irish, mostly Irish and Swedish. So, but I didn't learn that for a long time. My childhood up until that moment was trying to blend in, with the natives. I mean, I don't mean I mean that as an alien on the planet, like trying to blend in with the natives. I don't mean as a white person trying to blend in with the natives of 109th Street in East Harlem, which is where I lived. So in a sense, it was both. I was always trying to blend in, trying to show that I fit in. And so in pre-kindergarten and kindergarten and first grade, I was accepted by my peers because I spoke Spanish and I spoke it well. And I could read. And so I felt happy in my identity as a half Puerto Rican child. So to have that taken away from me was a big shock. And then the other thing is that because I grew up in East Harlem and because my parents were radical, they were progressives, I knew about all these things that white people had done that were not very nice. I remember thinking, well, Abraham Lincoln was white and he was a good white person, but it was hard for me to figure out where I fit in to this world that I had been occupying. Suddenly I was like, I was way on the outside. I wasn't only on the outside because I think I'm probably neurodivergent. There was that aspect too, was that, there were things about me that seemed different already, besides the fact that I was whiter than everybody else. So this proved it, and it also meant that I was alone in my household. It meant that I had a different father than the other kids, which was like, "Shh, do not mention this. Don't talk about this." And my youngest brother, Tim, would, from time to time, if we had company, he would just suddenly fly out and say, Susie has another father. And everybody would be like, shut up. So that was why I felt like I was in trouble. I felt like, wow, this is bad news. This is not good for me. I think I know why. It wasn't just my mom who hid my birth dad from me. It was both parents. And I think the root of that was meant to be loving. I mean, we're talking about the 60s now, where sometimes even children who are adopted would be like, no, no, she's ours. She belongs to us. Ed would sort of put his hand on my shoulder and push me forward and saying, this is my oldest. And so there was never a doubt in my mind that I was his daughter. It took me a year or two to realize that my sister was actually his first child. Because it doesn't all sink in at once. At least for me, it didn't. It took years to process everything. And suddenly I realized, oh, I am not Ed's oldest. Allison is Ed's oldest. But I think the root of it was to be loving. I think that was the root of it. Of course, it's not factually correct. And the other thing that was confusing was that my stepfather had was very angry if anybody lied. The truth is the important thing. And here was this total lie that we had all been acting out for 9 years. So that was confusing. I would recommend, if you have a child and you're with a different father, that you just say, Susie has a different father. He lives in California. But I think there was also an element of jealousy that Ed did not want to acknowledge this other father. I mean, once it was all out in the open, then it was all out in the open. Ed would say your parents, and I would still feel the shock of like, what are you talking about? You're my dad. You're my daddy. Like, why are you saying that? And I would have to do the mental arithmetic, the gymnastics of going, no, daddy, another father in California. It was very jarring. And I still somehow thought of my stepfather as my dad pretty much right up until my mid-20s.
Finding out where she came from answered a lot of questions for Suzanne.
I met my birth father when I was 28. So that was 19 years later. And so much had happened in between. Yeah, and there were other issues too around the whole idea of music, because I love music. I was passionate about music, but I could not play it. I could not learn it. I couldn't learn it. Eventually, I found out that my real dad, my birth dad, could play the piano, and he played it by ear, and he played jazz. So my mother got me some lessons when I was 7 or 8, and I was not very good at it. And then I tried again when I was 11, and then I tried studying music in high school. And I think by the time I gave up trying to study music, I was 26 or 27. I'd already sold 4 million albums. And it was, I thought, I'm just going to hire this out, because why should I keep trying to learn music if I can't learn it? But it turns out when I met my birth father that he came from musicians. He came from a family of touring musicians. That my grandmother had been a drummer and my grandfather had been a trumpet player. And they had 3 children. The father left the family when she was pregnant with my dad. And so she had put my dad up in a foster home situation. So he never knew his parents either. So that was something we had in common, and we have forged a bond with that knowledge over the years. It explains a few things. Once I found my birth father and found out about his family, I at first I thought, what a coincidence. They're musicians too. I thought, wow, what's the chances of that? And then I thought, I thought I was doing something original. I thought that by going on tour, which I've always really loved, I always had I couldn't wait to hit the road when I was in my 20s, especially after working office jobs pretty much my entire life, or babysitting to make money. The idea that you could go on the road and make money playing music was like, sign me up. So to realize that that's pretty much how my grandmother spent her life. She wasn't a great mom, as far as I can tell. I eventually met some of my birth father's sisters. There was a brother that he had who died before I could meet him, but I had heard stories from the sisters that were not great, So this was a woman passionate about her drumming, not a good stay-at-home mom. So, but then I thought, oh, it all kind of makes sense now.
When Suzanne released Luka in 1987, it marked a big turning point in her career. I always thought it was just a story about a character she had made up, but it turns out the truth was something else entirely.
It is true that there was a personal side to Luka, to the song Luka, regarding my stepfather, and he was a violent man. I would say all of us were abused, really, in our house in varying degrees, depending on who it was. including my mom. So, but he had special things for me because his, I wasn't related to him. And just special things that he would do to me because of my particular makeup. So I survived all of that, and I still loved him in spite of these things that he would do. And so I felt that I wanted to write about it one day. I was inspired by Lou Reed. I had seen Lou Reed at a concert in 1979, and I was astonished by his writing and how truthful it was. Some of it I thought was repulsive, but there were one or two songs that really stuck out in my mind. And I studied those songs and I studied him for years. I would say for 5 years, because I saw him in 1979 and I wrote Luka in 1984. I consider myself slow, in spite of the fact that I had a big success in my 20s. I still feel like it takes me a long time to process things. So I spent 5 years watching Lou Reed, thinking about his message and his overall way of being, and I finally came up with the song Luka that I felt could tell the truth of what I had experienced without being revelatory or confessional. So that's what that mattered to me. And plus, I was still afraid. I was still afraid of my stepfather. He was a scary guy, and if he couldn't hurt me one way, he would do it a different way. So, I had to be careful, and I was careful. And I was glad that I was careful because Ed did not recognize himself. He spoke to me about the song. I played him the record before it came out. That's kind of interesting. I didn't have to do that, but thought he should hear it. And Luca came up and he said to me, "Is this a song about child abuse?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Where did you get that idea from?" And I was like, I froze. My stomach, it was like a block of ice. And I said what I say to all the journalists, there was a boy, he lived upstairs, his name was Luka. He was not really abused, like that. And he said, "So you were concerned about this boy who lived upstairs?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he said, "I think you're glamorizing a very ugly subject." And I was like, "I don't think so." And I said, "You might be responding to the production, because the production makes it sound like it's this triumphant thing." I said, "But I don't think I am." I said, I think I spoke in the way that a child would speak if they had been abused. And I said that to him clearly. And he accepted it. And he said, "Okay, if that's how you feel." And we went on to the next song. We went on to Casper Hauser because that had a little double entendre. The child in Casper Hauser, he's this guy who's been living in the darkness for 18 years and he comes out holding a wooden horse. He's rescued somehow. This is like a story from Germany in the 1800s. And the only thing he says is, "I want to be a rider like my father." That's what he says. And he means rider, like a horse rider. But I said, "I want to be a writer like my father," because Ed Vega was a writer. And I saw him blush at that line. And so in the end, I was glad I played the album for him because it had those kind of hidden meanings.
I wanted to go back to her mention of that Lou Reed concert in 1979.
Yeah, it was a pivotal moment for me to see Lou Reed. It was my first actual. It's the first concert that I admit to seeing. I had actually been to one other concert before. I didn't really go to concerts much. I didn't have money and I didn't date that much. So I had been to. I was dragged along by my sister to be a chaperone to see Billy Joel at Madison Square Garden in probably 1977 or 78. But I did not consider that my first gig concert to see because, I wasn't there voluntarily. So, whereas the Lou Reed one was like jaw dropping and really had a profound influence on me personally, on my writing. Lou Reed became a friend throughout my life. Eventually, it took 7 years before I met him face to face, which was harrowing and scary. But and it exists forever now on YouTube. If you want to see my first meeting with Lou Reed in 1986, you can watch 120 minutes with me completely losing my cool in front of Lou Reed.
With Suzanne growing up in New York City in the 1970s and her interest in music, I would assume Suzanne would have been all over the city checking out concerts at places like CBGB's and Max's Kansas City. But I would be wrong.
My friend Susanna asking me, did I want to go see this woman named Patti Smith? I was 15, so it was probably 1975. And so it was all going on over at CBGB's. And I said no. First of all, I didn't date. I didn't go out. I didn't even go out with my friend. I babysat. I was interested in, I had no money. Our family had no money. So that was my thing that I did on the weekends was I would babysit, listen to the records that whoever it was I was babysitting for, I would listen to their records, work on my songwriting, work on my writing. If they had a guitar in the house, I would play it. When she described what Patti Smith did, it sounded very scary to me. I was like, I don't want to go there and see this person making all this racket and yelling and I had parents who did that. I didn't need to go out for that. They sounded just like my parents, so I was not interested. It sounded scary, and I thought people might be taking drugs, and I was like, no, thanks. And 4 years later, I go to see Lou Reed, and then suddenly my perspective changes. But at the age of 15, I was not going anywhere. I mean, later on, I came to really love Patti Smith. We've now shared bills from time to time. We do benefits. And of course, I worked with Lenny Kaye. I mean, once I started working with Lenny Kaye, I would go see Patti all the time. And so I've come to know her and know her work and love her and respect her. But that in the beginning, it was like, no way. But it was that way with Lou Reed, too. I remember feeling really repulsed by the first half of the Lou Reed show. It wasn't until the second half that I was like, okay, I get this.
I had such a great conversation with Suzanne that I'm going to wrap up today's episode here and release a bonus episode next week. In that one, we'll dive into how she got her career off the ground, the reception to her 99.9 degrees Fahrenheit record, and her new release, Flying with Angels. Huge thanks to Suzanne Vega for such a fantastic chat, and be on the lookout for that bonus episode next week. And as always, a quick reminder that you can buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That, on 90s artists wherever you buy your books. And please try to leave a review wherever you're listening. It always helps other listeners find us. Thanks for listening.